Right after my husband's funeral, my stepdaughter sneered, "Find another table, this one is for real family only, not gold-digging second wives." I threw down an envelope and said, "Your father left me this letter. Read it before you celebrate too much." Their panic was absolutely delicious. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Like this story if you want to see how far a stepmother's revenge can go, and comment what you think was in that letter. Trust me, you're not going to guess it. But let me back up and tell you how we got here. Because honey, this story starts way before that funeral. My name is Margaret Maggie Sullivan, and at 63 I thought I knew what my life looked like. I'd been married to William Henderson for 8 years, and while our relationship wasn't some fairy tale romance, it was comfortable, steady. I was his second wife, he was my second husband, and we'd found peace in our golden years together. William had 3 children from his first marriage: Patricia, 38, Robert, 36, and Jennifer, 32. His first wife, Eleanor, had died of cancer 15 years earlier, and those kids worshipped her memory like she was a saint. I understood that. I respected it even. I never tried to replace their mother. But apparently, understanding wasn't enough for them. From day one, they made it clear I was an outsider. At family gatherings, they'd share inside jokes and memories, always making sure to emphasize how things were before Dad married Maggie. They'd show up at the house unannounced, treating me like hired help. Jennifer once asked me to make coffee for everyone, then loudly announced to her siblings, "At least she's useful for something." I bit my tongue for 8 years. William would always say, "They just need time to adjust, Maggie. You know how hard it's been for them." Time to adjust? After 8 years? After 8. But I loved William, so I kept the peace. Then came William's diagnosis: pancreatic cancer, stage 4. We had maybe 6 months, the doctor said, and suddenly his children became very interested in spending time with their father. They'd visit constantly, always bringing up financial matters. "Dad, have you updated your will lately?" "Dad, you should really consider putting the house in a trust." "Dad, we're just worried about your legacy." Meanwhile, I was the one holding his hand through chemotherapy sessions. I was the one getting up at 3 in the morning when he couldn't sleep. I was the one researching experimental treatments and flying with him to specialist appointments in different states. But at family dinners, they'd act like I was invisible. When William would mention something I'd done for him, they'd change the subject. When he'd praise my cooking or thank me for my care, they'd suddenly remember something urgent they needed to discuss privately. The funeral was exactly what I expected. Beautiful service, touching eulogies, lots of tears. But I noticed something interesting during those eulogies. Patricia, Robert, and Jennifer all talked about their father's wisdom, his generosity, his love for family. They talked about lessons he'd taught them about character and integrity. Funny how none of them seemed to have learned those lessons. After the service, we all went to Romano's restaurant, William's favorite place. I'd suggested it, thinking it would be nice to share memories somewhere he'd loved. The owner, Tony, had even prepared William's favorite table in the back corner. That's when Jennifer made her move. As I approached the table where the family was gathering, she stood up and blocked my path. "Excuse me, Maggie," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. This table is reserved for family," Jennifer continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Real family. You know, people who actually loved Dad, not women who married old men for their money." The entire restaurant seemed to go quiet. Patricia and Robert exchanged glances, and I could see Robert fighting back a smile. The other relatives and family friends who'd come to the luncheon were staring. Some looked uncomfortable. Others looked curious about what would happen next. For 8 years, I'd taken their snide comments, their deliberate exclusions, their little cruelties. I'd told myself it was grief, that they'd eventually accept me. But standing there, 2 hours after burying my husband, listening to his youngest daughter call me a gold digger in front of everyone who'd loved William, something inside me snapped. Actually, that's not quite right. Something inside me finally woke up. I reached into my purse and pulled out a cream-colored envelope. William's handwriting was elegant across the front, to be opened after my funeral. I'd been carrying it for 3 weeks, ever since he'd given it to me with strict instructions. "You know what, Jennifer?" I said, my voice perfectly calm. "You're absolutely right. This conversation is about family, about real family, about who actually loved your father. I tossed the envelope onto the table. It landed right next to the bread basket, and I watched all three of their faces go pale. Your father left me this letter, I continued, still speaking in that same calm tone. He asked me to share it with you after the funeral. He said you'd understand everything once you read it. Patricia was the first to recover. What kind of letter? Her voice was sharp, suspicious. The kind that explains exactly what your father thought about his real family, I replied. The kind that might make you reconsider who the gold digger really is. Robert leaned forward, his face flushed. Are you threatening us? Threatening you? I laughed, and I meant it. Honey, threats are for people who have something to fear. I'm just sharing your father's final words, his final wishes. Isn't that what loving children would want? Jennifer's hand was shaking as she reached for the envelope. This is ridiculous. Dad wouldn't have written anything bad about us. We're his children. You're right, I agreed. He wouldn't write anything bad about loving children. But he had plenty to say about greedy, disrespectful ones. The silence stretched out. Other diners were definitely watching now, though they were trying to be subtle about it. Tony, the restaurant owner, hovered nearby, clearly unsure whether to intervene. Patricia finally spoke. What exactly are you saying, Maggie? I'm saying your father was a lot smarter than you gave him credit for. He saw everything. He heard everything. And he made some very interesting decisions about his estate based on what he observed. That got their attention. All three of them sat up straighter, their eyes fixed on that envelope like it was a snake that might bite them. The will reading is Monday, Robert said slowly. Why would he write a separate letter? Maybe because he wanted to make sure you understood his reasoning, I suggested. Maybe because he wanted to explain why things ended up the way they did. Jennifer's face was white now. You're lying. Dad loved us. He would never leave us out of his will. Who said anything about being left out? I asked innocently. I just said he made interesting decisions. Maybe you should read the letter before you jump to conclusions. The three of them looked at each other, having one of those silent conversations that siblings have. Finally, Patricia reached across the table and picked up the envelope. If this is some kind of manipulation, she said, her voice low and threatening. Patricia, sweetheart, I interrupted. The only manipulation happening here is what you three have been doing for 8 years. Your father just finally decided to do something about it. Patricia's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. The letter was 3 pages long, written in William's careful script. I'd read it myself, of course. William had shown it to me before he sealed it, wanting to make sure I understood what was coming. Should I read it out loud? Patricia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. That's up to you, I said, settling into my chair. Though I think the other family members might be interested to hear what William really thought about how his children treated his wife. Robert's face flushed red. You coached him to write this. He was sick. He wasn't thinking clearly. Actually, Robert, your father's mind was crystal clear right up until the end. The doctors confirmed that. In fact, he made some very deliberate decisions in his final weeks. I gestured to Patricia. Go ahead, honey. Read your father's words. Patricia unfolded the first page and began reading silently. I watched her face change, watched the color drain from her cheeks. After a minute, she looked up at me with something that might have been fear. This can't be real, she whispered. What does it say? Jennifer demanded, reaching for the letter. Patricia pulled it back. It says, she swallowed hard, it says he was ashamed of us. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Robert grabbed for the letter, and Patricia let him take it. He scanned the first page quickly, his eyes widening. This is impossible, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. Jennifer snatched the letter from Robert's hands. As she read, her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning horror. He says we treated Maggie like garbage, she said, her voice hollow. He says we were cruel and disrespectful. That's just the first page, I said helpfully. It gets more interesting. The three of them huddled together, reading the rest of the letter. I could see other family members at nearby tables trying to figure out what was happening. William's sister Dorothy was frowning in our direction. His brother Frank looked concerned. After what felt like an eternity, Robert looked up at me. The house, he said flatly. What about the house? I asked innocently. He left you the house. Well, I am his wife, was his wife. That's usually how these things work. But we grew up in that house, Patricia protested. Our mother's garden is there, her roses. Your mother's roses that I've been tending for 8 years, I pointed out. Your mother's house that I've been cleaning and maintaining and loving. Funny how you never seemed concerned about the roses when you were asking your father to put the house in a trust. Jennifer was staring at the letter like it might burst into flames. The retirement accounts, she said weakly. Also mine, I confirmed. Amazing what happens when you're actually married to someone. But the life insurance policy, Robert said, his voice getting desperate. The big policy. That has to go to us. We're the beneficiaries. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It wasn't. Actually, Robert, your father changed the beneficiaries on all his life insurance policies 6 months ago. Didn't he mention that? The three of them stared at me in stunned silence. Other conversations in the restaurant had definitely stopped now. Even Tony had given up pretending not to watch our table. That's impossible, Patricia whispered. He wouldn't do that. He would, and he did. He also made some other changes that might interest you. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying this moment more than I probably should have. 8 years of their condescension, their dismissal, their cruelty. 8 years of being treated like an intruder in my own marriage. The lake house, Jennifer said suddenly, her voice filled with dread. Gone, I confirmed cheerfully. The boat? Gone. The investment portfolio? Oh, that's the really interesting part. The investment portfolio, I continued, savoring every word, was liquidated 3 months before your father died. Every penny of it. Robert's face went from red to purple. That's impossible. Dad had over $2 million in investments. Had being the operative word, I agreed. He liquidated everything and made some very specific arrangements with the proceeds. The three of them looked like they'd been hit by a truck. Jennifer was actually shaking now, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Where did the money go? Patricia demanded. Well, that's where your father's letter gets really interesting. He established several trusts. Trusts for what? Robert asked, though he sounded like he already knew he wouldn't like the answer. Education trusts for your children, I said. Your father's grandchildren. The ones you barely let him see in his final years because you were so worried about protecting them from the evil stepmother. I watched that land. All 3 of them had children. Patricia had 2 kids, Robert had 3, and Jennifer had 1. They'd used those children as weapons, controlling when William could see them, making sure I was never included in family gatherings. But he made some conditions, I continued. The trusts can only be accessed if the children maintain a relationship with me, their step-grandmother. Funny how that works. You manipulated him, Jennifer accused, her voice shrill. You turned him against his own children. Honey, I didn't have to turn him against anyone. You did that all by yourselves. I stood up, smoothing my black dress. Your father spent 8 years watching you treat me like dirt. He spent 8 years listening to your snide comments and watching you exclude me from family events. He spent 8 years seeing exactly who you really are. Patricia was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. We loved him. No, you loved his money. There's a difference. I picked up my purse, then paused and looked back at them. Oh, and one more thing. The will reading is Monday at 10 a.m. at Johnson Mitchell and Associates. I suggest you all attend. Why? Robert asked hoarsely. Because your father left you each something very special, something that perfectly captures how he felt about the way you treated his wife. I started to walk away, then turned back one more time. And Jennifer? About that comment you made when I arrived? About this table being for real family only? She looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. Your father left instructions about his burial plot, too. Turns out there's only room for 2 people there. Him and his wife. His real wife. The one who actually loved him. I walked away from that table with my head held high, feeling better than I had in 8 years. Behind me, I could hear them arguing in hushed, frantic whispers. I could hear Jennifer crying and Robert swearing under his breath. At the restaurant entrance, Tony caught my arm. Mrs. Henderson, he said quietly, I'm sorry for your loss. Your husband was a good man. Yes, he was, I agreed. And he always said the truth has a way of coming out eventually. Will you be okay? Tony asked, glancing back toward the table where the 3 Henderson children were still huddled in crisis. Tony, I said with a genuine smile, I haven't been this okay in years. As I walked to my car, I could see them through the restaurant window, still bent over William's letter, still trying to process what had just happened. They'd spent 8 years treating me like I was nothing, like I was temporary, like I was just marking time until they could reclaim their father completely. They were about to learn that their father had been paying attention the whole time. The weekend passed in a blur of phone calls I didn't answer and messages I didn't return. Patricia called 17 times. Robert left 6 voicemails. Jennifer sent a dozen text messages that ranged from pleading to threatening. I ignored them all. Instead, I spent Saturday morning in William's garden tending to Eleanor's roses. Ironic, isn't it? The gold-digging second wife taking care of the first wife's flowers. But I'd loved this garden from the day I moved in. Eleanor had excellent taste in roses, and over the past 8 years, I'd added my own touches while respecting what she'd created. The roses were blooming beautifully this late spring. The Mr. Lincoln variety that Eleanor had planted near the back fence was putting on a spectacular show of deep red blooms. The Queen Elizabeth roses I'd added 3 years ago were just starting to open their pink petals. It was peaceful work, this gardening. It gave me time to think. William had been planning this for months, maybe longer. I remembered conversations we'd had, seemingly casual comments that now made perfect sense. Like when he'd asked me about my relationship with my own stepchildren from my first marriage. "Do you think love can be forced, Maggie?" he'd asked. "Or does it have to be earned?" At the time, I thought he was just being philosophical. Now I realized he'd been watching his children's behavior and drawing conclusions. There was the time Patricia had called during Christmas dinner, demanding that William drive over immediately to fix her garbage disposal. When I suggested we could call a plumber in the morning, she'd said, "It's not your house, Maggie, and it's not your family." William had been quiet for the rest of the evening. Or the time Robert had needed money for his son's private school tuition. He'd asked William to meet him alone at a coffee shop, specifically excluding me from the conversation. When William mentioned it later, Robert had said, "This is Henderson family business." Maggie wouldn't understand. And then there was Jennifer's birthday party last year, the one where I wasn't invited despite being married to her father for 7 years at that point. William had gone alone, and when he came home, he'd been furious. Apparently, Jennifer had made a toast about how wonderful it was to have family time without any complications. Each incident had seemed small at the time, petty slights that I'd tried to overlook for the sake of peace. But William had been collecting them, storing them up, drawing his own conclusions about his children's character. The phone rang again around noon on Saturday. This time, it was Dorothy, William's sister. "Maggie, dear," she said when I answered, "I wanted to check on you after yesterday. You seemed upset when you left the restaurant." "I'm fine, Dorothy. Thank you for asking." The children seemed quite distressed about something. Patricia was crying when I left. I considered how much to tell her. Dorothy had always been kind to me, unlike William's children. She'd welcomed me into the family from the beginning and had never made me feel like an outsider. "William left them a letter," I said finally. "It contained some truths they weren't expecting." "Oh my," Dorothy said quietly. "What kind of truths?" "The kind that hurt when you haven't been paying attention." There was a pause. "Maggie, I need to tell you something. At the funeral yesterday, after you left the restaurant, Patricia approached me. She was asking questions about William's finances, about whether I knew anything about recent changes to his will." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that her father's financial affairs were none of my business. But Maggie, she seemed almost desperate. She kept asking if William had seemed confused or forgetful in his final months." I felt a chill run down my spine. Why would she ask that? I think she's looking for grounds to contest his will. I think she's going to claim he wasn't competent when he made recent changes. That evening, I called William's attorney, Harold Johnson. We'd worked together for months on William's estate planning, and I knew he'd been expecting this call. "Mrs. Henderson," he said warmly, "I'm sorry for your loss. William was a good man and a good client." "Thank you, Harold. I'm calling because I think there might be challenges coming." I assumed there would be. That's why William was so thorough in his documentation. "What kind of documentation?" I asked, settling into William's favorite chair with the phone. Well, William was quite concerned about potential challenges to his estate planning. He insisted we record several video testimonials over the past 6 months. In each one, he clearly states his mental competency, his reasons for the changes he made, and his specific observations about his children's behavior toward you. I felt relief wash over me. How many videos? 7 in total. He also insisted that Dr. Martinez, his oncologist, provide written confirmation of his mental acuity throughout his treatment. We have Dr. Patterson's psychological evaluation as well. Harold paused. Mrs. Henderson, your husband was very methodical about this. He anticipated every possible legal challenge his children might raise. He wanted to make sure his final wishes would be honored, regardless of their objections. What exactly did he leave them? Each child receives $1 and a personal letter explaining his decision. The letters are comprehensive, I could imagine. William had been a man of few words in daily life, but when he had something important to say, he was eloquent and precise. There's something else, Harold continued. William established a provision in his will that specifically addresses any attempt to contest the estate. If any of his children challenge the will, they forfeit their children's education trusts as well. All of it? Every penny. He was quite clear about this. Any legal challenge results in complete forfeiture. I thought about Patricia's 2 teenagers, Robert's 3 young children, Jennifer's 8-year-old daughter. Those trust funds represented their futures, their college educations, their opportunities. He really thought this through, I murmured. Mrs. Henderson, in 40 years of estate law, I've never seen anyone plan more carefully for family dynamics. Your husband spent months researching legal precedents, studying family law, making sure his wishes would be unbreakable. After hanging up with Harold, I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The garden was peaceful, the roses releasing their evening fragrance into the warm air. My phone buzzed with another text from Jennifer. We need to talk. This is family business. Family business. How many times had I heard that phrase over the years, always used to exclude me, to remind me that I wasn't really part of their circle. Well, they were about to learn that William had redefined what family meant. The will reading was Monday morning. I'd waited 8 years to see William's children face the consequences of their cruelty. 8 years of swallowing insults, overlooking slights, pretending their rejection didn't hurt. I thought about the first time I'd met them. How nervous I'd been, how desperately I'd wanted them to like me. I'd brought homemade cookies to that first dinner, had researched their interests so I could make conversation. Patricia had thanked me politely and then thrown the cookies away when she thought I wasn't looking. Robert had answered my questions with monosyllables. Jennifer had spent the entire evening talking to her father about people and events I couldn't possibly know about. I'd tried for months to find ways to connect with them. I'd offered to help with babysitting, had sent thoughtful gifts for birthdays and holidays, had invited them for family dinners they rarely attended. Every gesture was met with cool politeness at best, outright hostility at worst. Eventually, I'd stopped trying so hard. I'd focused on my relationship with William, on building a peaceful life together despite his children's disapproval. But they'd interpreted my withdrawal as proof that I didn't really care about family, that I was only interested in their father's money. How wrong they'd been. My phone rang again. This time it was Patricia. Maggie, she said, her voice carefully controlled. I think we need to clear the air before Monday's meeting. Do we? This situation has gotten out of hand. We're all grieving. We're all emotional. Maybe we said things yesterday that we didn't mean. Speak for yourself. Patricia, I meant every word. There was a pause. Look, I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but we're family. We should be supporting each other right now, not fighting. You're right, I agreed. Families should support each other. They should show kindness and respect. They should include each other in important moments. Too bad your father didn't feel like he had that kind of family. That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time you invited me to a family event, Patricia? When was the last time you asked about my well-being? When was the last time you treated me like I mattered? The silence stretched out. We can fix this, Patricia said finally. It doesn't have to be too late. You're right, I said softly. It doesn't have to be too late. For your children. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that makes you feel like anything is possible. I dressed carefully in my navy blue suit, the one William had always said made me look distinguished. As I drove to Harold Johnson's law office, I felt calmer than I had in months. The Henderson children were already there when I arrived, huddled together in the waiting room like conspirators. They looked terrible. Patricia's eyes were puffy from crying. Robert's face was drawn and pale, and Jennifer looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Mrs. Henderson," Harold's secretary greeted me warmly. "Mr. Johnson is ready for you." Harold's office was elegant and comfortable, with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and rich mahogany furniture. William had always felt at ease here, and I could see why. Harold himself was a distinguished man in his 60s, with silver hair and kind eyes that missed nothing. "Please, everyone take a seat," Harold said as we filed into his conference room. "Before we begin, I want to express my condolences again." William was not only a valued client, but a dear friend. Patricia, Robert, and Jennifer sat on one side of the polished table while I took a seat across from them. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. "Now," Harold continued, opening a thick folder, "William's will is quite straightforward in most respects, but there are some specific provisions that require explanation." He adjusted his glasses and began reading. The formal language was exactly what you'd expect. "I, William Thomas Henderson, being of sound mind and body," but then came the meat of it. "To my beloved wife, Margaret Sullivan Henderson, I leave the entirety of my estate, including but not limited to our family home, all bank accounts, investment portfolios, life insurance policies, and personal property." The silence in the room was deafening. I could hear Patricia's sharp intake of breath. "To my children, Patricia Henderson Walsh, Robert James Henderson, and Jennifer Marie Henderson Davis, I leave the sum of $1 each." Jennifer made a choking sound. Robert's face had gone completely white. "However," Harold continued, "William included personal letters for each of his children, which I'll distribute now." He handed each of them a sealed envelope. Their names were written in William's careful handwriting, and I could see their hands shaking as they accepted them. "There's more," Harold said gently. "William established education trusts for his grandchildren, totaling approximately $1.8 million. These trusts are managed by Mrs. Henderson and can only be accessed with her approval." "That's impossible," Robert said, his voice hoarse. "You can't make inheritance conditional on someone else's approval." "Actually, you can," Harold replied. "William was very specific about the terms. The children's relationship with their step-grandmother determines their access to their education funds." Patricia tore open her letter with shaking fingers. As she read, her face crumpled. "He says we were cruel," she whispered. "He says we treated Maggie like garbage and he was ashamed of us." Jennifer was reading her letter too, tears streaming down her face. "He says I was the worst. He says I was vindictive and hateful." Robert's letter was apparently the longest. He read in silence, his jaw working like he was chewing something bitter. Finally, he looked up at me with pure hatred in his eyes. "You did this," he said. "You poisoned him against his own children." "Robert," I said calmly, "your father was an intelligent man who made his own decisions based on 8 years of watching your behavior." "This is manipulation," Patricia said, waving her letter. "This isn't grief, this is revenge." "You're right," I agreed. "It is revenge. Your father's revenge for 8 years of disrespect." Harold cleared his throat. "There's one more provision you should be aware of. Any attempt to contest this will result in the immediate forfeiture of all grandchildren's trust funds. That stopped them cold." "You can't do that," Jennifer protested. "Those children are innocent." "Your father felt that parents who would contest a will out of greed weren't the kind of parents who deserve to control their children's futures," Harold explained. I stood up, gathering my purse. "Well, this has been enlightening, but I think we're finished here." "Wait," Patricia called out desperately. "Maggie, please. We can work this out." I turned back to face them. "Work what out, Patricia? You spent 8 years making it clear I wasn't family. Your father simply made that official." As I walked toward the door, Robert's voice stopped me. "You'll regret this, Maggie. We'll find a way to fight this." I smiled. "Go ahead and try. Your father anticipated that too." The phone calls started that afternoon. First Patricia, then Robert, then Jennifer. I let them all go to voicemail. Their messages ranged from pleading to threatening to desperately bargaining. "Maggie, please call me back. We need to discuss the children's future." That was Patricia. This is insane, Maggie. Dad wasn't thinking clearly. You know that. Robert's voice was tight with anger. I'm sorry, okay? Is that what you want to hear? I'm sorry for everything. Please don't punish my daughter for my mistakes. Jennifer. Crying. I deleted them all. The next morning, Patricia showed up at my door. She looked terrible, like she'd been up all night. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled, and she wasn't wearing makeup. We need to talk, she said when I opened the door. Do we? Maggie, please. My kids don't understand why Grandpa's college fund suddenly has conditions. How do I explain this to them? I considered slamming the door, but something in her expression stopped me. For the first time in 8 years, Patricia looked genuinely distressed about something other than money. You could start by telling them the truth, I suggested. That their mother spent 8 years treating their grandfather's wife like dirt. It wasn't that bad, wasn't it? Patricia, you threw away cookies I baked for your children. You excluded me from every family gathering. You acted like I was contaminating your family by existing. Her face flushed. I was protecting my children. From what? From having another grandmother who loved them? That hit home. I could see it in her eyes. I thought you were temporary, she admitted quietly. I thought Dad was just lonely after Mom died, and eventually he'd come to his senses. So you decided to make my life miserable until I gave up and left? She didn't deny it. Patricia, your father left you a letter. What did it say? Her voice was barely a whisper. It said I was jealous and cruel. It said I cared more about Mom's memory than Dad's happiness. And was he right? The question hung in the air between us. Patricia's composure finally cracked completely. Yes, she sobbed. He was right. I hated you because you made him happy. I hated you because he smiled more after he married you. I hated you because you were proof that he could love someone other than my mother. It was the first honest thing she'd said to me in 8 years. And now? I asked. Now I've lost everything. My inheritance, my children's futures, and any chance of making this right. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation. But what I saw was genuine remorse and desperation. Patricia, your children's trust funds aren't gone. They're just managed differently now. Her head snapped up. What does that mean? It means that if your children want relationships with me, if they want to know their step-grandmother, their education will be fully funded. And if they don't, then you'll have to figure out how to pay for college on your own. The calculation was already happening behind her eyes. Could she swallow her pride enough to encourage her children to have relationships with me? Could she pretend to accept me for the sake of securing their futures? What would that look like? She asked carefully. It would look like what should have happened 8 years ago. Family dinners where I'm actually welcome. Birthday parties where I'm invited. Holidays where I'm included. It would look like treating me like family instead of like an intruder. And if we do that, the trust funds are secure? Patricia, this isn't about performing for money. Your father's condition was genuine relationships, not fake politeness designed to manipulate money out of me. She flinched at the word manipulate. How would you know the difference? She asked. Honey, I've been watching your family manipulate people for 8 years. I'm an expert at spotting the real thing versus the performance. That afternoon, Robert called. His approach was different from Patricia's. Maggie, I've been thinking about what Dad wrote in his letter. And? He said I was weak, that I let Jennifer and Patricia influence my treatment of you instead of making my own decisions. Did he? He also said something else. He said I was the one he was most disappointed in because I used to defend you in the beginning. I remembered that. In the early days of my marriage to William, Robert had occasionally spoken up when his sisters were particularly cruel, but that had faded over time. What changed, Robert? There was a long pause. Jennifer convinced me you were playing favorites with Dad's attention. She said you were trying to replace our mother in his affections. And you believed her? I wanted to believe her. It was easier than accepting that Dad had actually found love again. By the end of the week, all 3 Henderson children had called or visited, each offering their own version of an apology. But I could tell they were strategizing, coordinating their approach. That's when Dorothy called with interesting news. Maggie, dear, I thought you should know. The children have been asking family members about your background, your finances, your relationship with William before you married. What kind of questions? Jennifer asked my son if he knew whether you'd ever been married to someone wealthy before. Patricia wanted to know if I thought you seemed manipulative during your courtship with William. I wasn't surprised. When direct confrontation failed, the Henderson children always defaulted to character assassination. What did you tell them? I told them the truth, that you made William happier than he'd been since Eleanor died, that you were patient with his health problems and devoted during his illness, and that anyone with eyes could see you genuinely loved him. That weekend, something interesting happened. William's grandson, Tyler, Patricia's 17-year-old, showed up at my door. Mrs. Henderson? I'm Tyler Walsh, Patricia's son. I knew who he was, of course, though I'd barely been allowed to interact with him over the years. He was tall and lanky, with William's intelligent eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Hello, Tyler. What can I do for you? I want to know about my grandfather's letter. Mom won't show it to me, but she's been crying for days and acting weird about money. I invited him in and made hot chocolate while I considered how much to tell him. Your grandfather was disappointed in how his children treated me, I said finally. He felt that they were disrespectful and cruel. Were they? I looked at this young man, so serious and direct, and decided he deserved honesty. Yes, Tyler, they were. Why? Because they saw me as a threat to their mother's memory and their inheritance. Tyler nodded slowly. Mom always gets weird when anyone mentions Grandma Eleanor, like she's protecting something. Your grandmother was a wonderful woman from everything I've heard. I never tried to replace her. But they thought you were? They thought I was trying to erase her importance in your grandfather's life. But Tyler, love isn't finite. Your grandfather loving me didn't mean he loved your grandmother any less. We talked for 2 hours. Tyler asked thoughtful questions about William's illness, about our marriage, about my relationship with his mother and aunts. When he left, he hugged me goodbye. I'd like to get to know you better, he said. If that's okay. I'd like that too. The next morning, Patricia called in a fury. What did you say to Tyler? I answered his questions honestly. He came home asking why we treated you so badly. He wants to know why I never invited you to his birthday parties. Good questions. What did you tell him? I told him it was complicated. Patricia, it really wasn't complicated. You were protecting your mother's memory at the expense of your father's happiness. Tyler's smart enough to understand that. You're turning my son against me. No, I'm giving your son the truth, something he apparently wasn't getting at home. That week, Tyler visited twice more. Then his younger sister Emma asked to come too. Robert's oldest daughter Sarah called and asked if she could visit during her college break. The Henderson children's strategy was backfiring spectacularly. Their attempts to control the narrative were failing because their own children were old enough to see through the manipulation. Jennifer was the last holdout. She made one final attempt at manipulation that was almost impressive in its desperation. Maggie, she said when she called, I've been doing some research into elder abuse. Did you know that isolating someone from their family is a classic sign of manipulation? Are you accusing me of elder abuse, Jennifer? I'm saying Dad's sudden change in his will looks suspicious. A court might agree. Jennifer, your father documented his decision-making process extensively. He also had multiple medical evaluations confirming his mental competency. But please, by all means, contest the will. What do you mean? I mean that any legal challenge results in your daughter losing her education trust fund. Completely. Forever. The silence stretched out. You wouldn't do that to an innocent child. I wouldn't, but your father's will would. Automatically. This is blackmail. No, Jennifer. This is consequences. 3 months after the will reading, I was finally settling into my new reality. The house felt different without William, but it also felt more peaceful. No more tension-filled family dinners, no more dreading holidays, no more walking on eggshells around his children's sensitivities. Tyler had become a regular visitor, often bringing homework to do at my kitchen table while I cooked dinner. Emma had started calling me Grandma Maggie, despite her mother's obvious discomfort. Even Robert's children had begun reaching out, curious about the grandmother they'd barely been allowed to know. That's when Jennifer made her move. I was in the garden planting spring bulbs when a police car pulled into my driveway. 2 officers got out, their expressions serious. Ma'am, are you Margaret Henderson? Yes. We've received a report of elder abuse. We need to ask you some questions. My blood ran cold. Elder abuse? Someone has alleged that you manipulated your deceased husband's will through emotional abuse and isolation tactics. I set down my gardening tools, my mind racing. Who made this report? We can't disclose that information, ma'am, but we need to investigate these claims. I invited them inside, served coffee, and answered their questions for 2 hours. They wanted to know about William's mental state, our marriage dynamics, his relationship with his children, the circumstances around his will changes. Mrs. Henderson, the older officer said finally, do you have any documentation of your husband's decision-making process? As a matter of fact, I do. I called Harold Johnson, who arrived within an hour carrying a thick folder. He spread William's medical records, psychological evaluations, and video testimonials across my dining room table. Officers, Harold said professionally, Mr. Henderson anticipated potential challenges to his estate planning. He was quite thorough in documenting his mental competency and his reasons for his decisions. They watched 3 of William's video testimonials. In each one, he was clearly lucid, thoughtful, and detailed in his explanations. My children believe I should leave my estate to them despite their treatment of my wife, William said in one video. They seem to think that biological relationships trump actual love and respect. I disagree. After the officers left, I called Tyler. Tyler, I need to ask you something directly. Did your mother or your aunts put you up to getting close to me? What do you mean? I mean, did they tell you to visit me? Will you? To build a relationship as part of some plan? There was a pause. Mom did suggest I should get to know you better after the will reading. But Grandma Maggie, everything I've said to you has been genuine. I believe you. But I think your family is escalating their tactics. What do you mean? Someone reported me to the police for elder abuse. That's insane. You never even raised your voice to Grandpa. That evening, Dorothy called with more information. Maggie, I heard through the family grapevine that Jennifer has been calling William's old friends, asking questions about his mental state before he died. What kind of questions? Whether he seemed confused or forgetful. Whether you seemed to be controlling his social interactions. She's building a case, dear. The next day, Harold called with disturbing news. Maggie, I've received formal notice that Jennifer is filing a complaint with the state's Elder Abuse Investigation Unit. She's also hired an attorney to explore options for contesting the will. I thought any contest would void the children's trust funds. It would. But Jennifer apparently thinks she can prove the will was the result of undue influence, which might override that provision. How strong is her case? Legally? Very weak. William's documentation is thorough and professional. But these investigations can be lengthy and stressful, and she knows that. She's trying to wear me down. That would be my assessment. That weekend, Tyler called with urgent news. Grandma Maggie, you need to know something. Mom and Aunt Jennifer have been having secret meetings. They've hired a private investigator to look into your background. What are they hoping to find? I don't know, but I heard them talking about your first marriage, your finances before you met Grandpa, your employment history. They're looking for anything that makes you look like a gold digger. I thanked Tyler and hung up, then sat in William's chair, thinking. The Henderson children were escalating because their initial strategies had failed. They couldn't manipulate me, couldn't charm me, and couldn't intimidate me into giving them what they wanted. So now they were trying to destroy me. It was time to remind them who they were dealing with. The private investigator must have been expensive, because it took Jennifer's team 6 weeks to discover what I'd never hidden. Before marrying William, I'd been financially comfortable in my own right. My first husband, David, had been a successful engineer who'd left me well provided for when he died of a heart attack at 59. I'd worked as a nurse for 30 years, had invested wisely, and owned my own home outright when I met William. The revelation that I hadn't needed William's money seemed to confuse Jennifer's legal strategy considerably. But the real blow came when Tyler called me with news that changed everything. Grandma Maggie, I found something. I was helping Mom clean out some old boxes in the attic, and I found letters. What kind of letters? Love letters. From someone named Marcus. They're dated 2 years before Grandpa died. My heart stopped. Tyler, what are you saying? I'm saying Mom was having an affair while Grandpa was sick. And from what I can tell from the letters, Marcus was pressuring her to convince Grandpa to change his will in her favor. The pieces clicked into place. Patricia's sudden interest in William's finances, Her questions about his mental competency, her desperate attempts to isolate me from family decisions. Tyler, I need you to be very careful. Don't let your mother know you found those letters. It's too late. She caught me reading them. She tried to take them away, but I'd already read enough. What did she say? She said it was complicated, that I didn't understand adult relationships. But Grandma Maggie, some of these letters talk about how much money Grandpa had, how she could convince him to leave more to his children if she played it right. Where are the letters now? I hid them. Mom doesn't know where. Tyler, this is very important. Do you trust me? Yes. I need you to bring me those letters. 2 hours later, Tyler arrived at my door with a shoebox full of evidence. The letters were devastating. Marcus, whoever he was, had clearly been coaching Patricia on how to manipulate her father's estate planning. You need to make him feel guilty about leaving so much to Maggie, one letter read. Play up the family legacy angle. Make him think he's betraying his children's futures. Another letter was even more explicit. If you can convince him to put the house in a trust with you as co-trustee, we'll have access to the equity, even if he doesn't change the will completely. But the most damning letter was dated just 3 weeks before William's death. The cancer is progressing faster than expected. We need to move quickly on the power of attorney discussions. I called Harold immediately. Harold, I need an emergency meeting, and I think you should bring an expert in probate fraud. The meeting the next morning was explosive. Harold's probate expert, a sharp woman named Rachel Torres, reviewed the letters with growing excitement. This is a clear case of attempted estate manipulation, she said. Patricia Henderson was conspiring with an outside party to influence her father's will through fraud. What does this mean for the elder abuse allegations? I asked. It means they disappear completely. In fact, Mrs. Henderson, you may have grounds to file criminal charges against Patricia for attempted fraud. Harold leaned forward. There's more. If Patricia was attempting to defraud the estate, it could void her access to her children's trust funds entirely. Even without contesting the will? Even without contesting the will. The trust documents include provisions about beneficiary misconduct. I thought about Tyler, about Emma, about all of William's grandchildren who were caught in the middle of their parents' greed. I don't want to punish the children for their parents' choices, I said. But I do want Patricia and Jennifer and Robert to understand that their father saw exactly who they were. Rachel smiled. We can work with that. 3 days later, I hosted a family meeting. All 3 Henderson children came, probably expecting another confrontation about the will. Instead, they found Harold, Rachel, and a box of Marcus's letters sitting on my dining room table. Patricia, I said calmly, would you like to explain to your siblings who Marcus is? The color drained from her face. I don't know what you're talking about. Really? Because I have 43 letters here that suggest otherwise. Harold opened the box and pulled out the most damning letter. He read it aloud, his voice steady and professional. When he finished, Robert was staring at his sister in horror. Patricia, what the hell is this? It's evidence of conspiracy to commit estate fraud, Rachel said matter-of-factly, which, under state law, is a felony. Jennifer looked like she was going to be sick. Patricia, please tell me this isn't real. Patricia's composure cracked completely. You don't understand the pressure I was under. Marcus said Dad was making a mistake, that he was being manipulated by Maggie. So you decided to manipulate him instead? Robert's voice was full of disgust. I was trying to protect our family's legacy. You were trying to steal money, I corrected. Your father was right about all of you, but he was especially right about you. Patricia, what happens now? Jennifer asked quietly. Harold answered. That depends on Mrs. Henderson. She could file criminal charges. She could pursue civil action for attempted fraud. She could void all the children's trust funds based on beneficiary misconduct. All 3 of them looked at me with terror in their eyes. Here's what's going to happen, I said. Patricia, you're going to confess your affair and your fraud attempt to Tyler and Emma. You're going to explain why their grandfather changed his will, and you're going to apologize for 8 years of treating me like garbage. And if I do that, then I won't file criminal charges. Your children's trust funds remain intact, and we can all move forward with the truth finally out in the open. I looked at Robert and Jennifer. As for you 2, your father left you each $1 and a letter explaining exactly why. You can accept that, build genuine relationships with me, and earn access to your children's education funds. Or you can keep fighting and lose everything. And if we choose to build relationships, Robert asked, then your children get their college educations, and you get the chance to show me that you're capable of growth and change. 6 months later, I was hosting Tyler's 18th birthday party in my backyard. Emma was helping me arrange flowers, chattering about her science fair project. Sarah, Robert's daughter, was setting up the sound system for music. Patricia and Robert were there, subdued but present. Jennifer had moved to California and rarely called, but she'd sent a birthday gift for Tyler. As I watched William's grandchildren laughing and celebrating, I thought about the letter he'd written to me, the one I'd never shared with anyone. Maggie, it had said, by the time you read this, you'll know whether my children learned anything from my final lesson. I hope they did, but if they didn't, I hope you'll find peace in knowing that love and respect can't be forced, but they can be earned. Build whatever relationships feel genuine to you, and don't waste time on the ones that don't. You deserve better than I was able to give you while trying to balance everyone's feelings. Live freely now. I was finally doing exactly that. Tyler blew out his candles and made a wish. When I asked him what he'd wished for, he grinned and said, "For more family parties like this one." Looking around at the faces gathered in my garden, I realized his wish had already come true. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.